America began to found an overseas empire in the late Gilded Age. And so let's look at how that began with this lecture. We have to talk about parallel tracks of development here because the United States was interested in two distinct areas. And joining these areas actually formed a large part of America's Latin American policy because it wanted to join the Caribbean basin, including Latin America, with the Pacific, specifically to get to China and Japan. The United States sought in its diplomacy markets, particularly markets in China and Japan. It sought colonies, which meant that it entered the quote-unquote great game of the late 19th and early 20th century great powers. And it sought both military and commercial bases and coaling stations to carry out the trade that it was seeking and to protect that trade. There's also some psychological aspects of Americans' desire for empire. Remember, the Indian Wars came to an end in 1890, which meant that the frontier was pretty well settled. And in fact, as of 1890, scholars such as Frederick Jackson Turner began discussing the idea that the frontier was done. It was over. There was no obvious line anymore on the frontier west after the census of 1890, in which there were less than 2 white settlers per square mile. And consequently, that had been considered the frontier line, and that was gone after 1890. Turner pondered how that would affect American institutions, United States political and psychological institutions, and social institutions. And this expansion and the momentum of expansion across the face of the continent, this, what in the middle of the 19th century had been called manifest destiny, may have propelled the U.S. at least across the Pacific, probably not into the Caribbean, but there may have been some kind of connection psychologically with continuing the frontier push, the manifest destiny push, beyond the landed frontier into the oceanic and commercial frontier of what turned out to be the Far East. The first area of interest that the United States had shown an interest in, however, was the Caribbean. They were interested in commerce, particularly sugar in Cuba, and the banana trade from Central America. That little yellow banana was a major reason for diplomacy in Central America throughout the first 2/3 of the 20th century. Another area of interest was banking and diplomacy. For example, diplomatically, the United States intervened in European disputes with American nations, such as the British Guiana border dispute between England and Venezuela, and the mediation of English and French loans, as well as American loans, to both Haiti and Santo Domingo, or the Dominican Republic. In fact, protecting banking investments in Haiti and the Dominican Republic led to U.S. occupations before World War I. The U.S. also had significant investments to protect in Mexico, particularly after the Mexican Revolution began in 1910. And of course, we were interested in, like I said, joining our interests in the Caribbean with our interests in the Pacific by cutting a cross-isthmus canal We had first begun thinking about doing this in Nicaragua, but we abandoned that plan because Panama presented itself. The same company, the de Lesseps company that had created the Suez Canal, had attempted to build a canal across Panama, but Panama was particularly unhealthy. Yellow fever, malaria thrived there. And until the 1890s, 1900s, no one really knew what caused yellow fever. They just knew that it was devastating in its effect, a terrible public health hazard. Anyway, we became involved in a Panamanian revolution. Theodore Roosevelt abetted the Panamanian Revolution against Colombia in 1903. We were subsequently given by Panama the rights to create the canal, and after de Lesseps had failed to do so, and William Gorgas of Alabama, as well as Walter Seibert of Alabama, did excellent work in the canal zone. Gorgas, a medical doctor, figured out that there was a particular mosquito that carried the germ that was responsible for yellow fever, and he was able to get rid of mosquitoes, not very kindly to the people. He had dictatorial powers, and Seibert was able to pull off a lot of engineering feats that led to the creation of the Panama Canal. Let's look at a map of the Caribbean Basin here. You can see our interest in Cuba. We were interested in Cuba. We were interested in the Dominican Republic. We were interested in this border. This, you may be able to see it down in the lower right. Of course, we were interested in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, because that's where bananas came from. And we were interested in Panama as well. Moving a little bit to the west, we had an area of interest in the Pacific. Again, sugar, a major commodity, was being produced in Hawaii by American companies after 1875, and Hawaiian politics being what they were, one of the kings was very favorably disposed to American business interests. However, nationalism reared its head. And when Lilia Kalani became queen, she was a member of the Nationalist Party and tried to reel in the political influence of these major corporations. She was unable to do so. She was overthrown in 1893. And after a number of years of dealing with Washington and McKinley holding off the annexation of Hawaii because he really thought that that was probably a bad idea for a lot of different reasons. Then finally, in 1898, the sugar interest convinced the McKinley administration to ask Congress to annex Hawaii and put it on the road to statehood. Now, some of our other interests in the Pacific included seeking islands on which to build coaling stations in order to halt European expansion in the Pacific. We were particularly interested in halting any further expansion of the British Empire, which was particularly assertive. We wanted to replace the British Empire, and we wanted to access markets in China and Japan, both of which had opened up after the Japanese market had opened up in the 1860s, and the Chinese market opened up in the 1890s. And we'll talk about the Chinese market in just a little bit. Anyway, we sought coaling stations spaced relatively equally across the face of the huge Pacific at Midway Island, which is a crummy little island in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific, Wake Island, Samoa, Guam, and the Philippines. Now let's look at a map of the Pacific Basin. This is a Marine Corps map, historical map from the 1940s that showed the battles of World War two in the Pacific, and you can see that it is called a Mercator projection, which tends to overemphasize the northern hemisphere. And it tends to flatten the map a little bit visually. But you can see we were interested in the Hawaiian Islands. We were interested in Midway. I'm sorry this isn't clearer. Midway, Wake Island. I'm not going to be able to find Samoa here. And Guam, I believe this is Guam right here. And the Philippines, of course, right here. We wanted these islands, and I'm sorry I can't find Samoa here. We wanted these islands in order to put coaling stations for our ships to be able to refuel themselves as they made the trip across the Pacific. This would allow us commercial access into China, particularly near Hong Kong, near Macau, into Canton, and then into southern Japan as well. So our founding of a republic occurred in the Pacific, and it also occurred in the Caribbean. There were very similar reasons for both of these, and we'll explore a little more thoroughly some of the actual goings-on in subsequent lectures. So thank you very much for your attention.